Is it possible for me to be creative if I'm not a creative person?
This is interesting because I do believe there is such a thing as talent. There's someone who, Kevin Durant has certain talents that I will never have.
Mm-hmm.
He's also 7 feet tall, right? And so I wouldn't say that I'm untalented in basketball. I would say that I don't have the same talent as him, right? But also he has a whole set of skills that he's developed over several decades.
Mm-hmm.
And so saying you're an uncreative person or you're not a creative person is like saying, I don't have height. Well, no, everyone has height. Some people are taller than other people. And so you have a height, right? Like I'm 6'2". I have a height, but there are people who are appreciably taller than me. And I think the same is true with creativity. I'm about 6'2" in creativity as well. There are some people who tower over me in their sort of inborn creativity. But it's not an excuse for me to not create. We are all creative beings to some extent. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing, right? Because it is only a thing that creative people say, what we call creative people. Only creative people say everybody's creative, Isn't that kind of interesting?
Yeah.
And I actually think I reject the notion of talent. And what I mean by that is I think we develop skills as sort of adaptive behaviors to life. So if you're born super tall, and everyone goes, you should play basketball or whatever. You're like, I guess I'll, you put in a lot of hours because of a genetic predisposition. There's certainly the biology. And so I think we don't get to completely decide what kind of art we want to make. I like what Parker Palmer, who's a Quaker, says about this, Quaker and author and activist. He says, before I can tell my life what I want to do with it, I need to listen to my life telling me who I am. Before I can tell my life what I want to do with it, set goals, I need to listen to my life telling me who I am. There's nothing wrong with that. Looking at who you are, the experiences that you had, how these things made you what you are, and then working with those, not like consigning yourself to I'll never do X, Y, or Z. If you want to do something, do it. But look at the stuff that you're working with. So when I look at my life, I go, well, I didn't play sports because I'm 5'7", 5'8". And because my mom told me, don't play sports, do creative things, it was very anti-athletic. So what did I do? I found myself painting and drawing and writing songs because girls wouldn't go out with me. And that's a good way to, vent that and eventually get girls to go out with you. I found expressions of things that were happening in my life. And I became creative, not because I wanted to be creative, but because that was my response to what was happening in my life.
Yeah.
Now, creativity means making something. So we learn this as parents, I think. I remember when my son was maybe 6, he was at our breakfast table just drawing, right? And I go, hey, buddy, you're really creative. That's amazing. He goes, what? I go, you're really creative. He goes, what does that mean? I go, means you make stuff? And I was like, oh, shit. I don't know.
From the mouth of babes.
and that there's that old Picasso quote, every child is an artist and you kind of have to learn how to not be creative. You don't have to convince a child, sing a song, draw something, build something, make something. It is innate.
Yeah.
Human beings are making things all the time.
Yes.
We're creating things. Now, we have relegated a certain set of activities that we call creative, which means artistic, but Elon Musk is creative in the sense that he is designing solutions to problems that people thought were impossible to solve. That's creative. So I would say, don't try to fit into some, artsy-fartsy box, right? Because if that's not your experience, that's going to feel frustrating. And don't try to be good at things that you don't feel drawn to. I had a great conversation years ago with an author whose name escapes me. He wrote a book called The Talent Code. Daniel Coyle. Great book about kind of debunking, skill versus natural born talent. He said this to me. I thought it was really interesting. He said, I said, how do you get great at something? He goes, it's, 10,000 hours of practice. He goes, but there's got to be some sort of intrinsic motivation. There's got to be what he called a spark. And I said, where does that come from? He goes, nobody knows. There's this kind of like spiritual, mystical, mysterious element to it, which is kids and human beings, adults, all alike, are sort of drawn to some things over others. And no amount of pushing can make somebody love something that they don't love. And so my encouragement to somebody who's uncreative is to maybe break up with that term a little bit, because creativity, in my mind, is just making stuff that changes something in some way.
Yeah.
It's transformative. It solves a problem. Engineering is incredibly creative. Art is creative. There's lots of different ways to think of creativity. And then look at your life. What are the things that happen to you that are just weird? Weird stuff that happened to me. I won the 6th grade spelling bee. And I beat an 8th grader, and I made him cry. And that was the only damn time I made an 8th grader cry. You bet your ass I felt good about that. And I found something that I could be good at that put other people down. As a 12-year-old pudgy kid who had long hair and was often mistaken for a girl because I had bosoms,
I love that.
That was a good thing for me to put. I was like, words. I can do things with words. I can be somebody.
Yeah.
It was adaptive. And then I kind of worked through some trauma and, worked around the ego thing a little bit. But it was a way for me to, make an expression of myself in the world. So you've got weird stuff that other people don't have. Harness that. Own the weird stuff and then apply it to something that you want to do. And then find somebody who's done it, right? And go, oh, you're an author and you write for an hour a day? I never thought of that. I guess I'll try that. Because you've got to kind of find your way. But take all your weird crap with you. Because that's what's going to make you you. And it's going to make it unique. And then you still got to do all the work. You got to put all your hours in it. But you're taking that thing with you that becomes your style. And there's this great quote from Bono talking about how they found that U2 sound. And he said, we were just trying to do what all the other 80s bands were doing, all these hair bands and stuff. And we weren't that good. I mean, The Edge is not that great of a guitarist. He's a unique guitarist, but he's not Steve Vai. And he said, and we weren't good enough to do what everybody else was doing. And this sound that you call the U2 sound that everybody's been copying ever since is just what came out. And I think there's a surrender that happens in the life of an artist where you spend a good chunk of your life trying to be your heroes. And you have to let that go. And you go, this is what came out. And eventually at some point, I'm going to own it. Hemingway didn't invent the terse writing style. He was copying Ezra Pound and a number of other people. Yeah. But he learned that terseness from Pound in exchange for boxing lessons, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And eventually you own what comes out. You go, this is what came out. And every musician knows this. You're like, nobody wants to hear the cover song. It's fun at a bar, but you don't want to make a lifetime of creative artistry playing other people's music. You do that to figure out what that feels like. I think it was, Fitzgerald used to copy, the works of his favorite authors, and so did Hunter S. Thompson. Hunter S. Thompson would write the Bible. He would type it on a typewriter. And he said, it's the best-selling book of all time. I'm going to try to beat it, very Hunter S. Thompson thing to do. And he said he wanted to write to see what it felt like, what those words felt like to his fingertips. So you copy other people as a way of kind of learning the craft.
Yeah.
But then own all your weird shit that makes that you can't outrun. I can't outrun all this weird stuff, but I can own it. Or I can try to push it off.
Yeah, own all your weird stuff. And this makes me think about, in high school, I worked at a Wendy's. This podcast is brought to you by Wendy's. Try a bacon double cheeseburger today.
Trying to clog your arteries today.
Oh, man. So me and Josh and our friend Pacho and his brother Jerome, we had all these weird voices. We always did. Just kind of joking around with each other. So what I did to make my job fun at Wendy's, I would take these weird voices and I would use them through the drive-thru system.
It's amazing.
And people would come into the drive-thru, they'd be like, were you the guy I was just talking to? I'm like, no, he's in the back.
What you're talking about?
That's creative. Yeah. Anytime you do something different, unexpected, it's creative. And so all your weird stuff is creative.
Yeah.
And what you're really talking about here, both of you, is expanding what you mean by creative. Yeah. Often people think they're not creative because they can't write poetry. Right. I can't write poetry. But then the other day, Professor Sean over here was telling me that, no, a lot of your blog posts are very poetic. And I'm like, I never thought of it that way. I've been writing poetry for years. I didn't realize it, right? But if I narrowed it down, I said, well, I'm not creative because I can't do this one thing. It's just like when you were a kid, your mom said, hey, you're not athletic. That's one of the most creative things you can do is play a sport, right?
Of course.
If I look at Michael Jordan, I mean, he's a creative genius, right? You look at Kevin Durant. I can't do what he does, and it's not all about height. John Stockton, he's an inch shorter than me.
Muggsy Bogues.
There you go. He's 5'2", right? He had to be creative.
That's the last time I watched NBA. 1990 something.
Yeah, classic.
And the point is, he was especially creative.
He was.
A 5'2" guy playing in the NBA, that requires a level of creativity.
He
And
had
so
to adapt.
yes. And so that's what creating really is. It's adapting to some situation, circumstance, environment.
Doing something a little bit different than how it's done before, understanding how it's done before. Will Durant, speaking of Durant, who's a historian, says, nothing is new except arrangement. And so my challenge is to anybody who would think of what they do as creative or uncreative, creativity is the act of rearranging familiar stuff in an unfamiliar way. And people go, I never thought of it like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the Beatles were creative in the sense that they were putting together songs in ways that had never been done before.
Oh yeah.
And now we look back on it and go you know, they went from mono to stereo. And we go, well, like, I mean, that's nothing now.
Right.
But at the time, it was revolutionary that there was a tambourine coming out of this speaker and a voice coming out of that one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and like you listen to the White Album, and half of it is like these classic songs that are
Yes.
just gorgeous, and then the other half you're like, what the hell were they doing?
Oh yeah, drugs.
Right,
Yeah.
lots of drugs.
Yeah.
And it's funny because their producer was like, can we just like cut out half of these songs and just make a hit album? They're like, no, we want the weird stuff in there.
And that was the genius of the Beatles,
Yes.
I think.
Yeah.
You know, is you got Love Me Do and then Revolution Number 9. Number 9.
Number nine.
Weird.
Yes.
And you got to get weird to get good.
Yeah.
And you've got to learn how to manage the weirdness because the weirdness is what's interesting. It's the stuff that comes out that you go, hey, that was pretty good. Let's hold on to that.
Yeah. Did you enjoy this standalone Patreon highlight? If so, you can listen to full episodes of the Minimalists private podcast available exclusively on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/theminimalists or click the link in the description. Your support keeps our podcast and YouTube channel 100% advertisement free.